Welcome. It's really good to see everyone. It's really good to be in Perugia. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon. My name is Nick Wren, and I head up Facebook's News Partnerships team based in London. I've been with Facebook for 2.5 years working with the News Partnerships team. Before that, I spent more than 2 decades as a working journalist and a newsroom editor. I've done print, wire, broadcast, digital. So I've got a fairly 360 view of newsrooms. I worked at places like Reuters, Press Association in London, BBC, and CNN. I want to talk to you today about Facebook and video, and specifically focusing on Facebook Live and having a review of some of the things that we've learnt and seen over the year or so that we've been working with news partners on Live, but also 360 as well. I'm not going to do all of the talking. I'm going to introduce halfway through Mark Frankel from the BBC, and we will make sure that we have plenty of time to take questions that you may have as well. Let me start with just a little bit of context about why Facebook has been investing in video recently. It's not too long ago that Facebook was primarily a text platform. You look at some of the old screen grabs of Facebook from just a few years ago, and it's very, very text, 1 or 2 pictures, but very, very text heavy. It looks really odd to look at those. So Facebook started as a text platform where people just exchanged messages, and then Facebook saw that people were starting to change their personal profiles, often to reflect their mood or show their holiday photos. So that was a signal to Facebook that it needed to build some photo sharing capability. And then as smartphones got more advanced and smarter and bandwidths improved, more people wanted to use video as a primary way to communicate with their friends and family and tell stories that they're interested in. And if you take the cycle further, we're in a world of VR and AR and 360. So I'm going to focus mainly on 360 and Live today as the focus of this workshop. Some numbers for you just for context. Live has been going about 1.5 years now, and 20%, 1 in 5 of Facebook videos are now live broadcasts. We've seen a fourfold increase in the watch time, so people are watching them for more, they're posting more of them, they're watching more of them. And in terms of engagement, you're going to get a lot more engagement typically on a Facebook Live than you are on a video on demand. People find that intimacy and the ability to have a live conversation about subjects that they're passionate about a big selling point. May to October, just so in the 5 or 6 months of last year, we saw a fourfold increase in people going live at any minute. But in terms of video, both video on demand and live, half the videos that you will watch from your newsfeed are shared by friends and family. So for newsrooms, making videos which are very shareable is a real focus to get engagement. So we started Facebook Live about 1.5 years ago, and initially Facebook started it as a platform. We tested it with public figures, verified celebrities, first of all, to see how it performed. And it performed really well in areas like comedy and food and keep fit. And then as we expanded it and the platform bedded down, we expanded it to news. And we did a survey near the beginning of Facebook Live to see the kind of things that people wanted when they were watching a live. And the focus group returned some results which were broadly broken down into these 5 buckets. So it's immediate, it's of the moment. People enjoyed that it's very immediate. And that could be a breaking news story, or it could be something that's relevant to that particular time. I remember using a Facebook Live showing me how to do a Halloween pumpkin when I was doing that with my kids. It wasn't news, but it was immediate and it was of the moment and it was important to me at that particular time. You get a unique perspective, so you are able with live to take people to places where they wouldn't normally go. They may not be invited to go backstage or on the red carpet. They can do with Facebook Live. You might take them to places around the world where they will never get a chance to go or see different perspectives of stories. Or you might just want to bring them into your newsroom. We've been surprised, and I think news organizations are surprised when they lift the hood and show the mechanics of how news is done, be it inside a TV control room or putting a newspaper together, whatever it is. People are very fascinated by the mechanics of journalism and how journalism works. People like that there's a social connection, that they have the chance to be part of the broadcast and to help shape the broadcast. And they like that it's authentic. You know, this isn't broadcast television where there are some artificial barriers between you and the audience. This can, done right, it can feel very authentic, very real. And it's, of course, it's live, so it's exciting and anything can happen. So we're going to go through a few examples. What I'm going to show you are not necessarily the biggest or the best or the most hit, but they're examples of Facebook Lives that we've seen over the past few weeks and months which fall into these categories, which we've spoken about and shared among our colleagues at Facebook as really interesting examples. First of all, it's not necessarily the news organizations that will make the news on Facebook Live. A lot of people, individual citizens, have made big news on Facebook, and not just Schumacher masks, but actually hard news. So this was a guy in the United States, in Charlotte, who went to a live demonstration after the shooting by police of a black civilian, and went live for about an hour and a half during the ensuing demonstration. And what was really notable about that was not the quality of the camera work or the commentary. It was the raw passion of being right there in a dramatic news event. And I remember watching this play out live. This particular guy had gone live 2 or 3 times off his own page with only a handful of people. And by the end of that broadcast, he'd had 1.3 million views and had been picked up by news organizations around the world. When I was working at CNN, one of the complaints from correspondents was that they were always tied to live positions, that they never got the chance to take the camera off the sticks as often as they wanted to and do some reporting and investigate more. I think live is a really good opportunity, and we've seen some really notable examples where news organizations have used live to illuminate stories which some news editors might feel as fairly difficult to get into running orders, especially some of the difficult, tough reporting stories around places like Syria or Aleppo on the left-hand side there. The one in the middle is Magda Gad from Expressen in Sweden, who's done some phenomenal work in Iraq. And on the right-hand side, Dargis Nerta from Norway in the jungle in Calais. So using live to actually show the faces and bring the humanity of these difficult stories has been particularly powerful. Here's another example from Paul Rotzheimer from Bild, who found himself in a refugee camp in Greece, and all of the other journalists had been thrown out by the police, and he was still around. So he used this as a unique exclusive. Again, the camera work is not particularly good. The audio is probably not broadcast quality, but you get a unique perspective of a story.
So, good morning, everybody. We are here again live from Idomeni. Our team from Bild, one of the only reporters who made it inside because the Greek police didn't allow any journalist to come in. That's why I have to walk very carefully here to show you what's actually going on. You hear helicopters and you see the helicopters still flying here over.
You see, it's very raw, very emotional, and very real. We talked about social connection, and this was one of my favorites. Back about last November, these two guys, a real priest and a real imam in the United Kingdom, were featured in an advert, a TV commercial for Amazon, and they bought each other back aids from Amazon, and it went viral. So Al Jazeera brought them in to their studio, and what I liked about this was that there's no Al Jazeera journalist present. They've just said, you guys come in and have a discussion about tolerance and respect in society. And it was fabulous, and it was just at a time at the back end of last year where we all needed a positive conversation about respect and tolerance in society. So it was of the moment, but there was no journalist present. It was these two guys having a really good, meaningful conversation with a global audience. The media was beaten up often around Brexit and around the US election for being out of touch and not being reporting at grassroots. I think there were some very notable exceptions that we saw on Facebook Live. Ranjini for the BBC, I thought, did some amazing work in the United States, just getting down at grassroots level. Here she is with a Donald Trump supporter at a Trump rally.
Oh. I did my car like this. This is my car.
Okay, let's see that. What's your name?
Max Chira.
Max. Let's see your car. So your car.
It's right down below. They wouldn't let me bring it up.
Oh wow!
Here.
So we can actually see this, perhaps.
Huh?
And how much did it cost, and how long did it take to get that?
It cost $1,000. Took 2 hours to put it on.
Now I have a question. What reactions do you get when you drive around with that?
I get a lot of thumbs up. A lot of.
But of course, it's not just the big global news organizations that can make an impact with this. We've been doing some work with some local newspapers and local broadcasters in the UK, and came across a couple of really good examples. So the first one there on the left-hand side is the Northwest Evening Mail, which is based in a small town in northwest England called Barrow. And they had a big fire in their town, and they went live twice, being very candid about what they knew about the incident and what they didn't know about the incident. And in those two lives, they got 92,000 views. The population of Barrow is significantly less than 92,000. And 2,500 comments. And what was interesting was that a lot of people may not live there, but they had a connection. They may have lived there or had relatives there. So for that time, the Northwest Evening Mail absolutely owned that story, and got huge reaction from it. The exploding pumpkin was very famous as an early example of Facebook Live. The sense of building anticipation can be transferred to news as well. So the Blackpool Gazette went live with the demolition of some iconic eyesore apartment blocks. And again, the comments that they had and the number of shares were often from people who didn't live there but had lived there or had a connection. So reaching that audience around the world who may have a local connection was a really big plus for them. And then, of course, it can be a civic engagement exercise as well. Some of you may have seen this. These are two congressmen in the US a few weeks ago who got snowed in down in Texas and could not get to DC by plane. So they went on a 2,000-kilometer road trip. And one of them was a Democrat and one of them was a Republican. And they'd not expected to be sitting together. And they spent hours in the car together and went live. And they did town halls. They took questions from people about politics, about society, about which restaurant to call in at, about whether to have donuts or not, about whether to drive on a full tank of gas or run it down to nearly empty before you fill it up again. And they also did carpool karaoke.
I fell into a burning ring of fire. I went down, 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 and the flames went higher. And it burns, burns, burns. The ring of fire, the ring of fire.
So when you think about political tensions in the United States at the moment, you don't necessarily think about that. That was a really refreshing story for us to see. And I think a very, really effective and fun use of live, which again got picked up by a lot of news organizations. We talk about authenticity, so I just wanted to give a couple of examples of what I feel that means translated to a news environment. Rasmus Tantholt from TV2 in Denmark was a very early user of live, and Rasmus spends a lot of his time in some pretty inhospitable places. He went live from Damascus very early on, from the back of a Christian church on a Sunday, just a couple of miles away from a war zone. And what Rasmus does is bring his authenticity as a person who cares about the people that he meets and the stories that he covers into a live environment. Again, there's no 2 or 3 camera shoot here. There's no studio lights. It's him and his iPhone, but he's very, very engaging.
Forbindelsen den ryger så meget.
Here he's in the US covering the US election.
Walmart. Vi var ude at køre bus. Vi er på vej fra New Orleans til byen Alice i Texas.
Couple of examples closer to my home in the UK. So Robert Peston from ITV News on the left-hand side there, covering the US Theresa May when she became Prime Minister. So right there, he's in the middle of a media scrum. He's getting pushed and shoved. People are shouting. And you can see that he's not ready for TV. He's not had a shave. He looks a bit scruffy. The hair's all over the place. But you're right with him there in a media scrum. And his expertise and his knowledge and his passion for the story comes over. So not only is he giving you an authentic, real view, it's like you're right with him, but he's also giving you that unique access. Some of you may know Kay Burley from Sky News. Kay has a reputation for being a very tough questioner. She's usually behind the desk in the studio, asking some very stern questions of politicians or newsmakers and taking very few prisoners. Kay's starting to do more lives. This one was in a seaside town which was meant to be the most Eurosceptic town in the UK around the Brexit interview. Her lives were really warm. I mean, she was funny, engaging, really personable, and a different side, a different persona, much more the authentic Kay Burley that you see on live. And then you can have some moments where you can surprise and delight people as well on live, whether that's using churritos to honor Britney Spears' 35th birthday, or whether you're the Lad Bible and it's the hottest day in Manchester and you get 4 brand-named ice creams and see which one melts first on the top of the roof of your office. And with it, get 6.3 million views. So there is a chance to have fun and give people some light relief as well. We have listened to some of the news organizations that we work with, and we've made some improvements to live over the past few months, including the ability to bring in guests, special guests, or members of the audience, or other correspondents, or whoever you like, in a kind of FaceTime environment in the second screen there at the top. To schedule a live at a certain amount of time, so you can have people in a waiting room and you already have a critical audience and maybe some questions as soon as you start the live, rather than tap dancing for a few minutes and waiting for the count to go up. And also the ability to pin a comment right at the top of the story, and that could be a user-generated comment, which is a really good question or a particularly relevant statement to set the tone of the debate, or it might be a public service announcement. Mark might talk about this, but the BBC did a really good job during the terrorist attack on Westminster a couple of weeks ago of using pinned comments to give people an update as the story happened. This particular example on the right is a station in the United States telling people that they're recording from or live streaming from a helicopter, and if the feed goes out, don't worry, they'll be back in a minute. We understand that doing lives or doing video costs money, so we are testing ad breaks, not just within Facebook Live, but within video on demand at the moment. We're working hard to roll this out in the coming months. It will be a mid-roll experience rather than a pre-roll experience, and it might look a little bit like this. So notice as the commercial starts to load, you get notification there of the ad break starting. And then once the ad, which is a 15-second ad, starts, you get a countdown clock and a scroll bar, so you know when the editorial content is going to come back. and then you're back into your story. So we just started with this. We're in the very, very early stages of doing some tests, and we're going to be rolling it out both on live and VOD in the coming months. So that's a really big initiative and a really big focus of the work that we're doing on live and on video in the next few months. So some takeaways from live. Make sure that it's a two-way thing. If it's a live and you're not interacting with your audience, you're missing a really big opportunity. And if you get it right, the audience will learn a lot more about subjects that they're passionate about and interested in. And you hopefully will learn more about your audience, where they're from, who they are, and the kind of questions and angles that they want you to pursue. And I think live is still a really good platform to experiment on new workflows, new ways of storytelling, new ways of illuminating some of the great talent in your newsrooms. If you want to follow where some of the biggest lives are happening around the world at any given time, we have a map which pulses when there's breaking news. So that is at facebook.com/live-map, and you can go in and have a look at the lives as they happen around the world. And we have more on the product and how to best use it on live.fb.com, more resources. Finally, a little bit on 360. 360 used to be something that was going to happen, and it's very much arrived. About 3.5 to 4 years ago, there was a massive storm in the Philippines, which decimated the small town of Tacloban. And I was in charge of digital coverage for CNN at that time, and we wanted to show the absolute horror of what had happened in that town. It was a very difficult story to cover for access and for pictures. So we worked with an aid agency that was going in there, and they agreed to strap a GoPro 360 camera, which was one of the first prototypes then, on top of a truck, and the truck drove for a mile down the street. And the photos that they had and the pictures that they had in 360 were amazing. You could look at the complete devastation and some of the people who were still struggling to survive. And we wanted to bring home the enormity of that story to a worldwide audience. A couple of problems. It took about 2 days for the file to get transferred back to headquarters because the file size was so big. And when we got it, we had a problem embedding it into any of our web pages. In the end, we managed to get it onto desktop, but the roughly 50% and growing proportion of our audience then who wanted to look at it on mobile couldn't. So it was a really difficult experience. And that was just like 3.5 days ago. Now 360 has arrived. Anybody right now can go 360. You can go 360 live as well. So just thinking in a very short space of time how the technology and the platform has come along is quite astonishing, and I think opens up some really cool opportunities for storytelling. A couple of numbers just to give you context. 25 million 360 photos have been published on Facebook, and more than 1 million 360 videos, and including a higher proportion of live videos now. Here are a couple of examples of some really innovative use of live. We talked about access and taking people to places which they can't see. This was Now This, showing decimated town in Iraq. Again, how many people are really going to get the chance to go there and see what it's like? New York Times went very deep on reporting similar story, this time in Fallujah. But again, you're in charge of the camera angle. You're in control of what you see and getting a real 360 experience. It's a very creative use of graphics. This one from PBS for a demonstration in Orlando. So not only is the story of the moment, but you're also adding context as you scroll around. And also for campaigning journalists, this is Sky going to Thailand as part of its environmental series, looking at water pollution.
Once upon a time, the canals that run through Bangkok gave it the name the Venice of the East. Well, a lot of that romance has gone now. A lot of the canals are simply filled with plastic waste and pollution, like you can see here.
Sometimes you may just have amazing pictures if you're on an Arctic volcano in your Nat Geo, so you don't need to fill the screen with graphics and just let the great pictures speak for themselves. And we're starting to see some really innovative use of 360 for branded content, or what I used to call advertorial or sponsored content. This is a really nice example from Time Out in association with a rail company. So it's sponsored content, but it's great use of live to entice people to come and have a day in Cambridge where the sun always shines that brightly. And hopefully you take the rail company to get there and spend money buying a train ticket. We have a lot of resources that we're building up. We're translating them into more languages. Be patient. We're building it out. We have this resource, facebook.com/journalists, where we're posting video tutorials and hopefully helpful hints on how to use or how to get the most out of these products. So go on there, have a play with it. If there's things that you don't see that you would like to see, please give us feedback, because we're actively looking to build it out and improve it and make it a sort of more of a one-stop shop for staying up to date with the changes that we make. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mark to come and talk about the BBC's experience. We've been working with the BBC on Facebook Live for a while, and I think it's fair to say they've done some, oh yeah, I've got a mic, great. They've done some really pioneering journalism. So Mark, first of all, if you and I are stranded and we can't get back on the plane to London, would you do would you go live with me in the car?
Of course. Absolutely.
When you started doing live, what were some of the barriers that you had to overcome in your newsroom? Because culturally this must have been quite alien for a lot of the journalists.
I think probably the hardest thing for us is to persuade people who are well versed in television that Facebook Live is something that they need to do and they should be thinking about doing, but to do it in an entirely different way. If you're used to staring down the barrel of a camera day in, day out, and you're told to go live on another product, the tendency is for you to stand in front of the same device and do exactly what you've always done. So the challenge for us, I think it's the same really for any publisher and any broadcaster, was to say, look, this is a great opportunity, but you've actually got to take yourself, you've got to remove yourself from that center of focus and actually do some storytelling and storytelling in a very, very different way. And what's fascinating to me is some of the best Facebook Live reporters and correspondents that we've had are probably some of the youngest novices in terms of reporting generally at the BBC. They just get it. They just get the medium. They understand instinctively what works. And it's not about them. It's not about their ego. It's not about trying to, locate themselves on the story, but they take you on a journey. A lot like the examples that you've shown. We had a very good example actually just the other day. We were phoned up by the British Army who said to us that we've got an opportunity for you to do some Facebook Lives with us in Estonia, because we're about to head out there for some exercises, and we wondered whether you'd be interested. And we said, yeah, fantastic, great opportunity. We had a reporter who ended up working with us on this story who'd never done a Facebook Live before. And I was quite nervous about this. You know, it's a big moment, there's a reputational risk. But he was brilliant because, unlike some others who may have started with a sort of piece to camera, standing in front of an armoured vehicle, here I am in Estonia, this is what we can see. He started with the tanks, he started with the machinery, he took you on a tour, and he located himself to the side of the camera shot for the entire time. And he was also absolutely committed to the comments throughout. So every time people asked him to do things or respond to things or put questions to various military commands, he was there. And I think this isn't something necessarily you can teach. It's almost instinctive.
Yeah. And a reporter who doesn't necessarily want to be in shot.
Yeah, a reporter without an ego.
Yeah. Now, I've got quite a few questions for Mark, but I can pick up the phone and talk to him quite regularly. So if anybody's got any questions for Mark or for me, please put your hand up and we've got a microphone at the back, so as we go along and you want to ask us anything, we'll come to you as well. When this came up and running, and I appreciate as well that Facebook Live is not the only live streaming platform there is. So, whichever one it was. Organisationally within the BBC, if you start doing something new, typically something has to, you have to stop doing something else. What kind of conversations did you have internally about making this part of your workflow?
I think it's about, you do need to make space, but I think it's about trying to explain the audience figures, the opportunity to reach a different demographic, and then the lessons almost take care of themselves. If you can say to your colleagues, look, this isn't about trying to do a live streaming video for Facebook and avoid doing your piece for the 6 o'clock news, or pretend that you haven't got commitments to radio, or you've got to write that piece, that's unimportant. No, it's about saying to them, look, while you're travelling to meet that person that you're about to interview, perhaps you could think about doing a Facebook Live on the way, and explain to them the figures, that by doing that they might actually reach a different demographic, people who are not naturally coming directly to your television and radio programs, not naturally switching on by default, and also they'll get fantastic ideas for Q material. I mean, one of the things that struck me is that quite often when we go live on Facebook and on Periscope and other live streams, the feedback that we get from the audience in terms of their life experience on a particular story is extremely valuable. We can start to use that in how we structure the stories in other places, how we write into stories. Do you have an example? Yeah, a couple of our top political correspondents were saying to me after the Westminster attack that they were struck by the quality of the comments that people were posting. We were broadcasting for 4 hours non-stop on Facebook that particular afternoon and evening. And some of them said to me, look, we took some of those comments into Q material that we were preparing for later that evening when we had two ways. One or two of them said that it coloured some of their their approaches to the story in terms of how the public were responding to it. One in particular said to me, I was really struck by how many people in the comments were saying that there was a sort of glorification of terror going on, that we were giving it so much coverage, not we, the BBC specifically, but we, the media. It was, to most people, a criminal act, and it had been elevated, and it hadn't struck a chord with them quite to that degree, and so they were thinking about how they were going to write into their story for later, and that really struck a chord with them because they were seeing these responses on the live stream. And so I think even for that, it's a valuable experience.
Any questions so far? There's a question right there, sir, on my left-hand side, your right.
My name is Andriy Suslenko from Ukraine. So the question is more about the ethics of live videos. So for example, someone wants to commit a suicide live on Facebook. That's question number one. How do we handle that? And another thing is, what are the limits that you can go with your broadcast in Facebook Live? Thank you.
I'll tackle the first one, and this is really difficult. Facebook always relies on the community to report things. We have very clear community guidelines about taste, decency, and using the platform. So when that kind of example that you note is brought to our attention, we take it down immediately. But this is one of the challenges. Live is live. You sometimes don't know what's going to happen. But in those particular circumstances, when we get notified, they come down as soon as we hear about them. It's a very good question. There's sort of some of the ethical problems have been discussed around going live from war zones, or is there anything out of bounds that you would not consider, or what are some of the?
It was interesting. One of the examples that you showed from a sort of riot, and as you were showing that, I was thinking, would we have done that? What would we have thought about if we had have done that? I think there's a really interesting trade-off here, because on the one hand, you want to bring the rawness, that sense of place to a live, and give people the opportunity to see it unfiltered, unfettered, give them the access that they don't get through the prism of a journalist, that they can talk directly. On the other hand, you've got an absolute obligation as journalists to give a degree of context and to make sure that you're not creating a situation that can cause more harm. And we think about these things all the time. So we do a lot of breaking news Facebook Lives, and some of them are frankly chaotic. And you cannot predict what's going to happen. But the one thing that we always do is think about all the eventualities that might happen before we go live. So, you know, what would happen if somebody came into shot? What would happen in the event that we got new information from the police? What would happen if we suddenly got a crowd behind us forming and, you know, we would have to deal with that? How many people have we got assigned to moderating the comments? If somebody starts naming somebody who's potentially an attacker in a situation, how would we deal with that? So, you know, you've got to almost draw yourself a list of questions, a list of things that you would need to have to deal with, and then embark on the process. But I think it's the rawness of it is still a valuable experience for people.
There was a question from a woman just in front. That's right, yes.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Bayan from the Jordan Media Institute, and I'm working on a project on media and information literacy. And we do go through this with the students. We're dealing with 7 to 9 graders, and they tend to go live. And some citizens in Jordan tend to go live during car accidents. And you see people dying, and that's something that we're trying to teach them, which is basically ethics and the responsibility in using Facebook. I know journalists get some training on this, but it's the public that we're afraid of. They have this tool at their hands, and they're using it and abusing it.
That's very good feedback for us as we look for ways to educate people about internet literacy or digital literacy. That's very good feedback. Thank you.
I would say the one thing, I was talking about this morning in another session, that I was struck, if you remember the Berlin market attack, Christmas market attack in December, I was struck by how many organisations went live to that, and it was just sort of wallpaper pictures of, you know, emergency vehicles and people running in all directions and screaming and shouting. I blogged about this at the time because I thought, what's the responsibility that we have as journalists here? Surely we need to add some context before we go live. The other thing, though, that struck me as I was watching this were how many people came forward as eyewitnesses who we were then able to talk to as a consequence of them seeing the live. So again, it kind of works both ways. On the one hand, you've got that responsibility for providing people with journalism that is genuinely journalism, it's not voyeurism. On the other hand, you've got to give people the opportunity to see something in order that they can then come forward with information. So, you know, it was another opportunity to get hold of eyewitnesses who were very, very valuable to us that evening.
There's a gentleman down at the front who may or may not be live already.
I'm live.
You're live. Okay, we're not, which looks good.
So a couple of questions. My name is Francesco Facchini, and I'm developing the mojo culture here in Italy.
We're just going to turn your microphone on there.
It's on? Are you listening?
Yeah. You don't want to disturb your live, though.
No, I don't disturb my life. So my name is Francesco Facchini. I'm a developer of Mojo Culture here in Italy, mobile journalism. I got a couple of questions. Sorry if I will give you a question that you haven't made an answer because I had some delay coming inside. The first question is for you, Mr. Drake. Which kind of advices would you give to freelance mobile journalists to get the Facebook Live chance we have profitable on economical way and on a point of view of this job? And for you, Mr. Frankel, how do you avoid the problems you have on the ethical point of view and on the privacy point of view when you're going 360 live? Because, you know, many people you are recording and catching live is not able to know that they are live because perhaps they're passing over you, next to you. And how do you avoid this kind of ethical problems?
So I'll take the first one, which was about how can freelance journalists get the opportunity to get revenue from their lives. So anybody will have the opportunity to insert an ad into a Facebook Live. They will need to hit a critical mass of audience first, number to be confirmed. And then it will be optional. You don't have to. If you don't want to do an ad, you don't do an ad. It'll be your decision. So I don't know the levels of revenue for individual freelancers. I wouldn't even be able to guess at that at the moment. We'll get a better idea as we roll this out. But there will be that opportunity.
And on the ethical issue, it's a very valid point, but I don't think it's any different to the rights and privacy issues that you'd find on a normal live, frankly. I mean, we've only done a couple of 360 lives, and we've got more we're planning, but I would suggest that you need to look at the entirety of your location and make sure that you've secured the rights and the permissions of everybody around that. Now, if you're going to go to a very crowded space and do a 360 live and there's lots of young people and there's all sorts of things going on, you might need to ask yourself, is this possible? Is it acceptable? Would I be putting those people in any danger by doing that? But it's the same questions that I raised a moment ago, really. Most of the 360 lives that I've seen so far, and Nick would probably have more information on this, have tended to be in places where you've got an expanse of land and territory, or you're trying to show off the sort of the nature around you rather than individuals, if you like. Yeah, exactly, an experience of some kind.
I'm interested to know what are some of the unexpected lives that have really been a hit for you inside your newsroom.
Yeah.
And you know that my follow-up question is going to be, what are some of the ones which probably haven't gone so well, or some awkward moments?
Yeah, well, I think one of my all-time favourite Facebook Lives, which actually was not one of our most successful in terms of views, but I just think it was just brilliant. It's a man called Steve Rosenberg, who's our Moscow correspondent, and he is, some of you may know him, but he is, apart from being brilliant as a Moscow correspondent, a fantastic pianist, and he can play almost anything. And we decided a year ago, and we're thinking of reprising it again this year, to get him to do a Facebook Live of Eurovision requests. So he stuck a phone next to his piano, and we hooked him up, and it was over an hour, I think, because he just kept going and going. He took requests, and people would say, can you play me the 1974 winner, and whoever came second in 1965 or whatever it was, and he would go, yes, that would be the Polish song, and off he would go. It was absolutely extraordinary. Obviously, you need somebody as brilliant as that to do it, but what was fantastic is it was a fully interactive experience, because you had a story that people were, which was fun, people were interested in, it was coming up, it was a good way to signpost our coverage of the Eurovision Song Contest, which we had a lot of stuff online about it. But the fact is that everyone who posted a question got a response, which, you don't normally get with a Facebook Live. So it was entirely interactive. One of the other ones which I really enjoyed was during our Brexit coverage, we decided to give over the Facebook page, Facebook Live, for about half an hour or so, 20 minutes I think it was, to two of those who were campaigning. Eddie Izzard, who's a comedian and was campaigning for the Remain side, and Daniel Hannan, who's an MEP, quite a right-wing MEP, who was campaigning for the Leave side. And the two of them sat together in a very crowded sort of space, because we could only find this room where they were both on the campaign trail, so we had to sort of squeeze them into a cubicle, which was quite amusing in itself. And neither of them had done Facebook Live before, so we gave them a few instructions and said, just answer the questions that you can. And it was hilarious, because after a while you got Daniel saying to Eddie, I think you should answer that one. And Eddie was going, no, I think that's one for you, Daniel. So it was interactive between the two of them. It was interactive with the comments. And it was just amusing and fascinating all around, because they were challenging each other about the levels of questions that they were prepared to answer. And you got an insight into their personalities, and you got an insight into the campaigns. And again, the audience felt that they were front of centre of the story. So I think those kind of things, where you're really involving people, are fascinating. One other example I'll give you, which was an unexpected hit for us. There was a story about the first freight train from China to London. I don't know whether some of you saw this. It was a bizarre story about this train that had travelled right the way across China and ended up in the UK. And we had some aerial footage of the train arriving. And for some reason, the Facebook audiences were absolutely fascinated with this story, and we just had footage of this train travelling across and arriving finally at its destination. And I think we had 3.5 million people watching and asking about, where the train had travelled to and how difficult it had taken, the journey had been, and why this was a first. We got one of our correspondents involved in the comments, and it became a really, really fascinating story for lots of people. And it was just that kind of reveal moment, which we've talked about before, which was great.
The power of train spotters.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
So what's been the most awkward moment?
So I spoke about this morning at another session, and I think it'll live with me for some time. But one of the most awkward ones was one that we did after the shootings in Orlando, where we went to Trafalgar Square in London, because there was a vigil for the gay community who wanted to pay their respects. And our reporter went down there, and he got hold of a couple of young people to talk to, and they started doing a Facebook Live with these two young men, and they were talking about what the attacks meant to them and the gay community and what it would mean, for months and years to come. He came back to the office, and he sat down with me, and I said, that was really engaging. Did you ask them how old they were? And he said, no, why? And I said, well, I think you should. And luckily, he still had their phone numbers because he'd taken their details. So he phoned them up, and they said they were 15. And I thought to myself, well, okay, so how many different things have we broken here? There's a whole permissions issue, there's a privacy issue, what do their parents know? This has been on a live broadcast to sort of, at that stage, 38 million fans potentially on the Facebook page. They hadn't said anything that controversial, but we had gone through no process whatsoever. And then I had the awkward decision of having to decide whether we took the video down, because of course with Facebook Live video it saves onto the page, and there are all sorts of editorial concerns there. There were a lot of people who were commenting below in quite a vicious way about these two young men, which was really unpleasant. So in the end we decided to remove the video because it was the safest thing to do, and that was I learnt from that you've got to go through those stages. You've really got to go through all of those things.
Thank you for your candour on that one. There for the grace of God go many of us, I have to say. Question here.
Yeah, just two questions. You've shown us a live map, and shown us that some regions are using live Facebook more than the other, very much like Europe and the US are the one using it the most. So I'm wondering if you've done any research why some regions are using more Facebook Live than other. And also you mentioned about the possibility to put up the quality comments. How would you choose which comment is a good one and which is not?
Okay, so I don't have a regional breakdown, but certainly breaking news is fascinating because you will suddenly see a really big concentration in a particular city, and that could be in Istanbul and Ankara with the coup attempt in Turkey. That was massive. Or it could be Leicester City winning the Premier League in England, where all of a sudden half of the middle part of England sort of went huge, which must have puzzled many people in other parts of the world. So, obviously areas with good connections and the ability to go live easily, with smartphones, good connections are going to probably over-index, but I don't have a regional breakdown. The live map, by the way, only has public content at a certain level, so it has to meet a certain threshold of size of audience before it hits that map, and it has to be public. So anything private between just you and your friends privately wouldn't go on there. The pinned comment, that's down to the publisher. So the pinned comment is chosen by, if you want to, you don't have to have one, is chosen by the news organisation that's doing the live. There's a question. I've got one there, and there's one at the back as well. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, if that's okay.
Can I just ask about Facebook's sort of attitude going forward about the curation of live video? And we all know a bit about the algorithm, love it or hate it, and how live video will fit into that, whether it's more likely to get precedence over images or text. And also, for instance, if 5 media companies are all live Facebooking the same press conference or something, how will Facebook decide who gets placed in people's feeds?
Good question.
That is an individual decision. So everybody's newsfeed is a reflection of your own habits on Facebook. If you never look at any lives, if you don't like lives and you never look at them, the chances of them coming to the top of your newsfeed are going to be very low, because the algorithm would have picked up on the signals that you prefer reading linked articles or just looking at photographs. And if 5 or 6 news organizations go live with the same press conference, the news organizations which you tend to favor in terms of whether you've liked their page or not and how often you interact with their content, whether you go in and like it or share it or comment on it, that will be the one that will probably bubble up highest. So it's the ranking is done on a unique individual basis. Does that help?
Yeah, I just wondered, because you're pushing live video, whether the algorithm will be pushing it to the top to encourage people to watch it more, which encourages more production of it, for instance.
Yeah, no, it will be down to your individual viewing habits or reading habits. Yeah, and there was a question. Yes, question right here by the wall, and then I believe there was one at the back. So you go first, and then we'll get the microphone down here next. So you go first, and then we'll pass the microphone down.
So I'm Kasia from Prague.
Hi.
And my question kind of piggybacks off of your Brexit story that you were talking about. And my question is, the biggest tips that you hear about going live is that you should hold some suspense and tell the story. But what if you're a publication that deals mostly in economic or kind of policy wonk? Should you go live to stay relevant, or what kind of tips do you have for that?
I've got my own thoughts. Mark might have one on that as well. I would say absolutely give it a try, experiment. Just because you don't have necessarily a really cool location like the landscape around Perugia to go live from, doesn't matter. If you have people who are passionate about the subjects and who have genuine expertise and who are willing to have a two-way conversation around the parameters of that story, I think my guess is that you will find a very engaged audience. May not necessarily be a mass audience, but they will be passionate about the journalism that you're covering, and they will welcome the chance to speak to your reporters and your journalists.
Yeah, no, I'd echo that. I mean, I think the visuals are important and valuable, but if it's a really dry story, but a really important story, like Brexit, and you've got somebody with expertise, and they can break it down in simple terms, it can work really, really well. And one of the things I've noticed some organisations have done, some publishers have done occasionally, is they've used props. So it's almost like a sort of science experiment in economics, which it can sometimes work, sometimes it can fall flat. You've got to think it through. You've got to kind of storyboard it a little bit. But you can, if you've got a slightly mad correspondent who is willing to take a chalk and a board and some props and actually deconstruct some economics for you as a Facebook Live, I could see that being quite appealing. But you've got to think it through.
Thank you for waiting.
So since Facebook Live launched, publishers have acquired a lot more ability to add all kinds of bells and whistles to their broadcasts, like on-screen text and cutting between live feeds and company logos and so on, which sort of takes it more into the realm of traditional broadcasting, which is something that partners like the BBC might feel more comfortable with and have the infrastructure to do well. So how do you walk that line between something that's maybe a bit rough and ready and something that's a bit more slick, polished, that audiences might like or might not?
That's a really, really important question, actually, and I've been thinking about this one a lot because, interestingly, the more polished we've tried to be with Facebook Live on the BBC, the worse the Facebook Lives have been. which was not what I expected. We've got lots of expertise in studio-led production. But, for example, during the conventions, in the run-up to the US elections, Facebook built a really nice studio for broadcasters to do lives at, and we used them. And we had a series of guests, and it looked extremely polished. Our viewing figures were actually quite disappointing. It was essentially like putting television onto Facebook, and it did not work in that it was interactive to an extent. We were answering people's questions, but they didn't feel they were getting a behind-the-scenes experience. They didn't feel that we were taking them anywhere. It didn't add anything to the categories of the things that Nick was mentioning earlier. And in a sense, as soon as we took Regini onto the conference floor, and she started walking around and pulling people aside and saying, what do you really think about this? Or show us that badge that you're wearing, and what does that really mean? The viewing numbers started to climb up again. So I think there's a danger of over-professionalising.
Can I ask you, we've got like 4 minutes left. Can I ask you, not necessarily Facebook Live, any live broadcasting platform, what would you like to have as a storytelling tool that you don't have at the moment?
I think that for us, probably the most valuable thing is the ability not so much to sort of storytell, but to monitor and keep across the best of the comments that we're seeing. So the ability, for example, which we've discussed, to pre-moderate comments on sensitive live broadcasts where you're dealing with a breaking news story, I think would be hugely valuable, because we just can't predict when somebody's going to try to name somebody in a difficult way, or defame somebody, or cause a libelous, post a libelous comment, or whatever that might be. And I think alongside that, the ability to have some kind of delay system so that you can effectively go live but under delayed circumstances would also be really handy for us on the same basis.
What kind of story would that be for?
Now, it could be that you're trying to film something where there's an element of jeopardy. It could be that you're in a breaking news situation where you're wanting to bring the audiences much closer to the action, but you're just a little bit nervous about what you might encounter, somebody coming into shot. I think we might need to start thinking about that a lot more.
Good, thank you. Any final questions from the gentleman at the front there? Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
I have a question for you, Mark. You mentioned that television and Facebook Live aren't exactly the same, but there may be a trend they are converging. And in that case, don't you think that, in the case of further converging, you may be losing your technological sovereignty for news distribution in a similar way that, for example, print media are losing their sovereignty over their media of distribution?
Look, I think that there are risks inherent in lots of things that we do. The way I look at it is that, I didn't invent Facebook Live, but it's here. I didn't invent Facebook, but it's with us. And, I think we have an option to embrace it and make the best of it, with the caveats that I've mentioned in terms of security, protection, rights, all the things that we've talked about. Or to say, no, the whole distribution mechanism is so fraught with risk for us as a publisher that we're just going to kind of go like that. In terms of the television point, I think all I'm trying to say is that if we try to look at Facebook just as another form of television, it totally misses the point of the interactivity and getting closer to those fans and those audiences that you struggle with. Yes, there are opportunities to just plug and play. You could put a live feed of anything into the back end of the Facebook API and play it out. Sometimes there may be an advantage to doing that. We've done that with Prime Minister's questions. We've done it with agency footage of an event. But I think if you continually do that and you build studios and you over-professionalize it, the danger is that you are missing the point of why Facebook has been successful with live, which is all about the audiences and all about that interactivity.
I am afraid we've run out of time. I'd like to thank Mark for giving up his time. Thank you for giving up your time. Thank you for the sound and vision people and the microphone carriers for their help as well. Thanks very much. Hope to see you soon.